My panel's here in the arena. Staff writer at The Atlantic, Tolu Oloronipa, CNN political commentator, former deputy communications director in the Biden White House, Kate Bedingfield, and Republican congressman, former Republican congressman and Speaker pro tem, Patrick McHenry. Welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for being here. Congressman, the question I have heading into next week, this potential $200 billion ask from the White House to pay for this war. I mean, you saw how some of the people who used to be the president's most ardent MAGA supporters responded to that. I'm curious whether Republicans are going to want to do this on their own, because they're unlikely to get a lot of help from Democrats.
Well, they can't do it on their own. You have to get 60 votes in the Senate, and you're going to have a bipartisan vote in the House. The House majority is so narrow currently, you don't have enough Republican votes to do much of anything on a daily basis. So something of this magnitude will have to be bipartisan. The appropriations process for war supplementals going back 30, 40 years has always been a bipartisan process.
Yeah.
This is the war vote. This is the war vote is on the supplemental, on the replenishment of our weapons systems. This is really the question of whether or not there really is a MAGA split. We have some influencers here that have gotten in fights with President Trump, and over the last 10 years, anyone who's in the MAGA movement that gets in a fight with President Trump loses. Marjorie Taylor Greene, not in Congress anymore. Mm-hmm. And so these significant voices that say they espouse Trumpism or MAGA more than he does are traditionally losers in that effort to fight with him. And I think this is just going to be another example of that.
Well, and you can see it in the approval rating. I mean, Republicans, 84% of them say they approve of how President Trump has handled Iran. Just 11% say they disapprove. And sorry, Kate, jump in.
No. Well, I was just going to say, I think it's actually sort of interesting on the Democratic side, too, because, you know, historically, you would expect there to be some bipartisan support. It is difficult to take a vote that can be framed as not being willing to supply troops with what they need when they are in battle. And so that historically, particularly for moderate Democrats, has been a place. I mean, you can look back, obviously, at the Iraq War. But I think given the broad unpopularity amongst the general population thus far around this effort in Iran, combined with the kind of continued echo chamber of these prominent MAGA voices expressing concern, whether that's having a real impact on MAGA voters, the data would suggest actually probably not yet, but it is contributing to an overall sense that this is unpopular. And I think for Democrats, I think moderate Democrats you might have in another scenario seen vote for this money are not going to.
How do you see the difference or potential difference between where the pressure that you have seen those Democrats face, especially moderate Democrats, over the years of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, with a war that Donald Trump started when Donald Trump is so toxic with the base?
So I think there's some of that. I think the fact that this is Trump's project does have an impact on some of these Democrats. But I think the bigger factors here are, one, rising gas prices, which is front and center for voters. And I don't think any Democrat is eager to seem like they are part of contributing to that problem. But
understatement.
To say the least, that's real political insight here for you. You're welcome. You're welcome. But secondly, I think that Trump's inability thus far to make a coherent, cohesive argument as to why we are doing this also creates an environment where Democrats are going to be just less inclined to support it.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's his inability, but it's also his unwillingness to even try. He spoke at the State of the Union for nearly 2 hours and barely talked about Iran, and now it's the biggest news story in the world. And his unwillingness to justify this before the American people, before Congress, is part of the reason why he's having a split within his own party, and part of the reason why he's not likely to get the support that you would expect in a bipartisan way. At least at the beginning of wars, you normally get at least some bipartisanship at the very beginning. Everyone rallies around the flag, rallies around the troops. You're not seeing that as much this time around, in part because the president has not explained why we're doing this, why we're all sort of having to pay the price for this with higher gas prices, higher inflation, and a lack of understanding about where this goes next.
Yeah, well, and then of course the big question, Congressman, and I want to put up this other piece of this Quinnipiac poll that we have, Republicans on whether or not we should have ground troops in Iran. Okay, so different from what the president's been doing so far. 52% of Republicans oppose the idea of putting U.S. troops on the ground in Iran. And the reality is the president, I mean, it does seem like a live possibility that there is at least a conversation about whether troops should go in to try to secure any nuclear material in Iran, which would be a significant potential escalation. They don't seem to be selling that either, if that's what they're talking about doing.
Yes, that's true. They haven't done the storytelling first. I mean, as we've just discussed, they haven't done the storytelling about what the Iranian regime has done. That is bipartisan facts that we've discussed for the last 30 years of the malevolence of this regime killing Americans and our allies globally, and the proper good that has been done by removing and decapitating this regime. I think there's bipartisan agreement on that. Now, every movement off of that becomes much more fractured in our politics. What you see in this poll is what you'll see in every poll around military action, a deep skepticism of the American people that we should do anything that goes outside, outside the bounds of our nation. And so that skepticism is born out of experience. You would see a similar poll in World War II on whether or not we should be engaged in World War II.
Up until Pearl Harbor,
right.
Of course.
But even then, there was skepticism about sending ground troops to Europe in response to the Japanese attack. So, but I know we'll get to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
We are going to touch on that at the end of the show, yes.
But the skepticism is now. The question here is the ramifications on the election. That means you have to prove out results around your actions. Each week we go by, we're at a different state of play. And this administration, in coordination with Israel and our allies in the Middle East, is getting results week over week. That is a good thing. But the faster it gets to a close, the easier it's going to be to actually replenish our munitions. The easier the vote will be on this supplemental, the easier the politics will be in the gas prices and everything else.
But this is also, I agree with a lot of what you just said, but I think this is also where Trump's natural inclination toward hyperbole hurts him. I mean, we heard last summer their nuclear program has been obliterated. You know, we continue to hear, time and again, this effort's going perfectly, we've crushed them. And so if in the effort of trying to make the argument for why you're doing what you're doing and then the wins you're notching, if you've already kind of blown through the idea that these wins are, matter, you've kind of put yourself in a weird dynamic. And this is where I think the lack of credibility is problematic for him.
Yeah, an interesting point. All right, coming up next.